In this video, we're going to discuss some of the other senses besides vision that we have a little bit less knowledge about, but still know quite a bit. Just like our vision is based on light, our hearing is based on sound waves. Sound waves enter the auditory canal after being funneled by the pinna, that's your outer ear, at which point the sound waves vibrate against the tympanic membrane, also known as the eardrum, and ossicles, those the malleus, the hammer, the incus, the anvil, and the stapes, or the stirrup, before finally reaching the cochlea, which is a snail shell-like bone structure containing auditory hair cells arranged on the basilar membrane. Those auditory cells convert sound waves into electrical signals, just like what happens in vision. Everything has to be converted into electrical signals in order for the brain to understand them. After being processed by auditory hair cells, electrical signals are sent through the cochlear nerve to the thalamus and then to the primary auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. And just like with vision, the auditory cortex mainly acts as a switching point, directing information to the other parts of the brain, which coordinate to give us the full range of possible perceptions we can have. All parts of the brain are working together. But one thing that's unique about our hearing is that it's also connected to our vestibular system. This system regulates our ability to balance and detect where we are in space. The vestibular system is comprised of three semicircular canals, fluid-filled bone structures containing cells that respond to changes in the head's physical orientation. Disturbances in the vestibular system can result in issues with balance, including things like vertigo. Touch involves somatosensation. This is the process by which our external organs, mainly our skin, transduce physical stimuli such as fuzzy velvet or scalding water into electrical potentials that can be processed by the brain. The transduction receptors in the skin are called mechanoreceptors. Nociception involves the perception of pain, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next couple of slides. Touch is unique because we have touch receptors all over our body, including skin that's part of other sensation systems like our ears or tongue. I love this image called the somatosensory map, which shows the correspondence between brain processes and sensory sensitivity. The larger the picture of the organs, the more sensitive to touch those parts of the body are. So our hands, our faces, facial organs, and genitalia are the most sensitive parts of our body as measured by how much somatosensory processing exists in those areas. The phenomenon of a phantom limb happens when a person's limb has been amputated and yet it still feels like the limb is present. This can often be accompanied by discomfort, itching, or even extreme pain, like the sensation that the limb is being actively crushed. There is some evidence to support the idea that the damaged nerves from the amputation site are still sending information to the brain, and that the brain is reacting to this information. Some treatments for phantom limb syndrome, therefore, work by tricking the brain, using a special mirror box to create a visual representation of the missing limb. This technique allows the patient to manipulate this representation to a more comfortable position. Both smell, which we'll talk about on this slide, and taste, coming up on the next slide, are chemical senses because they require the transduction of chemical stimuli into electrical potentials. This happens because the receptors involved in our perception of both smell and taste bind directly with the stimuli they transduce. Odorants in the environment bind with smell receptors found in the olfactory system. Because the smell receptors send projections to the brain through the plate of the skull, head trauma has the potential to cause anosmia, or loss of smell, which is commonly experienced by people who play contact sports like boxing. But when the head trauma is resolved, sense of smell returns, so it isn't a permanent damage to that particular sense. For taste, we should clarify some misconceptions about the tongue and the way it works. First, the little bumps on your tongue are actually not taste buds, which is a common misconception. Those are papillae, and the taste buds are actually located in little divots around those bumps. Just like with our sense of smell, we experience taste when tastins in the food we eat chemically bind with taste receptor cells. The binding of those chemicals with taste receptor cells results in our perception of the 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and savory, although some scientists believe there are more. Another misconception involves the map of the tongue. We used to believe that there were certain parts of the tongue that contained receptors for each specific type of flavor, but now we know this is false. All areas of the tongue with taste receptor cells are capable of responding to every type of taste. Here we're going to talk about multimodal perception. But before we get into this in detail, let's watch a quick video about something called the McGurk effect. Please pause this video and watch the BBC video clip on Canvas showing how the McGurk effect works. So as we learned from the video on the McGurk effect, our minds are constantly merging and combining information from multiple sensory sources at the same time, which influences our perception. The sounds you hear are influenced by the sources of visual information we get. This is known as the superadditive effect of multisensory integration and explains why you're still able to understand what a friend of yours is saying if you're speaking to each other in a situation with a lot of background noise or distractions. You're able to integrate other kinds of sensory cues from each other. By contrast, those extra cues are less effective if we don't have the other distractions or background noises. Without all of that other noise, just hearing the person's voice is enough to understand them, and other cues are basically useless. This is known as the principle of inverse effectiveness. However, the extra cues may be valuable for other types of communication, such as paralanguage, flirtation, romantic bonding, etc.